For years, Robyn Brown appeared to be at the center of Kody Brown's world. She was the wife Cody seemed most emotionally connected to, the person he repeatedly defended, and eventually the only wife remaining in his plural marriage. But now, the situation looks very different. The Brown family that viewers first met on Sister Wives has changed almost beyond recognition. Christine left. Janelle walked away. Meri finally ended her spiritual marriage to Cody. And that leaves Kody and Robyn trying to navigate a family structure that no longer resembles the one they once promised viewers would last forever. But here's where things become especially interesting. What does Robyn's life look like now that the other wives are gone? And what does that mean for her relationship with Cody? Because for years, Robyn was often portrayed as the wife who desperately wanted the entire family together. She talked about wanting sister wives. She talked about the children growing up together. She talked about preserving the family. And yet, one by one, those relationships fell apart. That doesn't necessarily mean Robyn caused everything that happened. The Brown family's problems were complicated, and every relationship had its own history. But from a viewer's perspective, there is one undeniable reality. The plural family Robyn entered no longer exists in the same way, and that changes everything. When Sister Wives began, Cody wasn't simply presented as a husband with multiple wives. He was presented as the head of a huge family. There were multiple households, dozens of children, family celebrations, disagreements, vacations, holidays, and constant negotiations about how everyone could remain connected. It was chaotic, but it was also the central promise of the show. The idea was that these women could live separate lives while still functioning as one family. For years, viewers watched Cody move between households. Christine had her own home, Janelle had hers, Meri had hers, and Robyn eventually became another major part of that structure. But the family dynamic began changing dramatically. The wives became more independent, the children grew older, and disagreements that had once been brushed aside became impossible to ignore. Eventually, the marriages themselves started collapsing. Christine was the first major break. Her decision to leave Cody wasn't simply the end of one relationship. It became a turning point for the entire family. Suddenly, viewers had to ask a question that had seemed almost impossible years earlier. What happens when one wife decides she doesn't want this family structure anymore? Then Janelle's relationship with Cody deteriorated. Their disagreements became increasingly public, and eventually, Janelle also moved forward without him. Then came Meri. For years, Meri and Cody's relationship had been complicated, distant, and increasingly difficult to define. But eventually, that chapter also came to an end. And suddenly, Cody was no longer balancing 4 marriages. He was left with Robyn. This is where Robyn's situation becomes fascinating because Robyn once entered the family as the newest wife. She wasn't simply joining Cody, she was joining an already established family. She became part of a system that had existed for years before she arrived, and she repeatedly expressed how important the plural family concept was to her. But now, the sister-wife structure is gone. That creates an uncomfortable irony. The woman who once talked about wanting sister wives now lives in a marriage where there are no other wives. And Cody's relationship with his former wives hasn't simply disappeared. Those relationships have left behind emotional consequences that continue to affect the entire family. There are adult children involved. There are unresolved conflicts. There are complicated family loyalties, and there is a history that cannot simply be erased because the marriages ended. That's the reality Robyn now has to live with. One of the biggest changes for Cody is how much smaller his immediate family structure has become. At one point, he had multiple wives and a massive network of children and households. Now, the situation is dramatically different, and that could put a completely different kind of pressure on Cody and Robyn's marriage. When you remove the other marriages, there is nowhere else for the emotional tension to go. There are no other households competing for his attention. There isn't the same complicated schedule. There isn't the same plural marriage structure. Cody and Robyn are essentially left with each other. And that raises another question. Was their relationship stronger because they were part of a plural family or because they were able to function differently from the other marriages? That's something only they can truly answer. But viewers are naturally going to watch their relationship differently now. For years, Cody could move between different relationships. Now, the spotlight is much more concentrated on Robyn. The biggest problem may not even be the former wives. It could be the children. Kody's relationships with several of his adult children have become a major part of the sister wives story. As the children grew older, they became increasingly independent. They developed their own opinions, they started questioning decisions made by their parents, and some relationships became deeply strained. This has created a situation where Kody and Robyn aren't simply dealing with the end of plural marriage. They're also dealing with the consequences of years of family conflict, and that is something money, houses, or a change in family structure can't automatically fix. A broken relationship with an adult child doesn't disappear just because the cameras stop filming. That's why the future of the Brown family remains so complicated. The marriages may have changed, but the family history remains, and Robyn is still connected to all of it. This is the question fans are asking now. Will Kody finally try to repair some of his relationships with his adult children? Will Robyn encourage him to make peace? Or will the family continue moving in separate directions? And perhaps most importantly, can Kody and Robyn build a peaceful life together after the collapse of the plural family they once claimed to value so deeply? Because their biggest challenge now may not be another wife. It may be the past, every argument, every broken relationship, every child who feels disconnected, every former wife who has moved on. All of it follows them into this new chapter. And that's why Robyn is facing a very different reality today. She isn't simply Kody's newest wife anymore. She's his only wife. And that means the future of their relationship is about to become much more important than ever. But there's another side to this story that could change how fans view everything. Because while Kody and Robyn are trying to move forward, the former wives are building lives of their own, and one of them may be proving that leaving Kody was only the beginning. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. While Kody and Robyn are left trying to navigate a completely different family structure, Janelle Brown has been showing viewers what life can look like after leaving a relationship that no longer works. Janelle's story matters because she isn't simply another former wife. For years, she was one of the people who seemed most committed to the practical side of the Brown family's lifestyle. She worked, she managed finances, she raised children, she supported the larger family structure. And even when things became difficult between her and Kody, she didn't immediately walk away. That makes her eventual decision to move forward particularly significant. One of the biggest changes in Janelle's story is the sense that she no longer appears to be waiting for Kody to decide what happens next. That's a major contrast to the earlier years of Sister Wives. Back then, family decisions often revolved around Kody, where everyone would live, how the family would function, how the children would be raised, how the wives would divide their time. But the older the children became, the less control Kody had over the family's future. And Janelle increasingly seemed comfortable making decisions based on her own priorities. That's an important shift because once one wife realizes she can build a fulfilling life outside the plural family structure, the entire argument for staying becomes much weaker. Janelle's children also became an important part of this transformation. Her relationship with her children has remained central to her life, and watching them grow into adults changed her priorities. She no longer had to make every decision around maintaining a household for younger children. Instead, she could start asking herself a completely different question: what do I actually want for the next chapter of my life? And that question is powerful. For years, the wives often talked about sacrificing for the family, but eventually, sacrifice can become exhausting, especially when the family structure itself is changing. Janelle reached a point where moving forward seemed more important than preserving something that was already falling apart. And that may be one of the biggest differences between Janelle's current life and Kody's. Kody may still be an important part of Janelle's history, but he doesn't have to define her future. That's the message fans have increasingly taken from her journey. And it's exactly why Janelle's transformation is so interesting when compared with Robyn. Robyn stayed with Kody. Janelle left, Christine left, Meri left, and each woman is now building a different version of life after plural marriage. That creates a fascinating comparison because Kody once presented plural marriage as the structure that allowed everyone to thrive. But now viewers are watching the former wives create independent lives outside of it, and that naturally raises an uncomfortable question. Who actually looks happier now? Of course, happiness can't be measured from television episodes or social media posts. We don't know everything happening privately in anyone's life. But the visual contrast is impossible for fans to ignore. The former wives have increasingly developed their own identities, their own homes, their own businesses, their own relationships, their own plans, and their own communities. Meanwhile, Kody and Robyn remain connected to the complicated history of the family they once shared. And Janelle isn't the only former wife changing the narrative. Meri Brown's story is just as important. For years, Meri seemed stuck in an emotional limbo with Kody. She wanted clarity, she wanted connection, she wanted their relationship to mean something again. But eventually, she had to confront the reality that the relationship wasn't returning to what it once was. Once Meri began moving forward, something changed. She stopped defining her life around whether Kody wanted the marriage. That's a major psychological shift, and it sends another message to the audience. Leaving doesn't necessarily mean losing. Sometimes leaving means finally getting the opportunity to discover who you are without the relationship controlling your identity. And that idea is becoming one of the most powerful themes in the later chapters of Sister Wives. Then there's Christine. Christine's departure was perhaps the most dramatic example of what happens when someone decides they are done waiting. She didn't just leave Kody. She eventually built a completely different life. She found love again. She created new family traditions. And she demonstrated that the end of a decades-long relationship doesn't necessarily mean the end of happiness. For viewers, Christine's transformation became one of the clearest examples of the difference between staying in an unhappy situation and taking a risk on yourself. And that undoubtedly changed the way fans looked at Janelle and Meri as well. Once one person leaves and survives and appears to thrive, it becomes easier for others to imagine doing the same. This brings us back to Robyn. Because when Christine was still there, when Janelle was still there, and when Meri was still emotionally connected to Kody, Robyn could still exist inside a larger system. Now she can't. There are no other sister wives sharing the same daily reality, no other marriages for Kody to balance, no larger plural household to point toward. The relationship is much more isolated, and that could be both a blessing and a challenge. On one hand, Robyn has Kody's full attention. On the other hand, she also has to deal with everything that comes with having his full attention. There are no distractions. There is no other wife to absorb part of the tension. And there is no longer a functioning plural marriage around them. That's ultimately what makes this chapter so fascinating. The Brown family isn't simply going through another disagreement. The entire structure has changed. The wives have taken different paths. The children are adults. Old loyalties have been tested. And Kody and Robyn are facing the consequences of a family system that has fundamentally transformed. But here's the part that fans should watch carefully. The most important question isn't whether Christine, Janelle, or Meri will return. They have already built lives beyond that old structure. The bigger question is whether Kody will eventually realize that repairing his relationships with his children may matter more than defending the past. Because if that happens, Robyn could find herself in a completely different position. She may have to watch Kody confront years of unresolved family conflict. She may have to support him through difficult conversations. And she may even have to accept that rebuilding those relationships could require Kody to acknowledge mistakes. That's where the next chapter gets really interesting. Because the Brown family's future may no longer be about plural marriage at all. It may be about rebuilding what remains. And if Kody finally decides to reach out to the children he's lost touch with, the reaction from the family could be explosive. Because not everyone may be ready to welcome him back. The Brown family's story has reached a point where the biggest drama may no longer be about Kody's marriages. It may be about his children. For years, Sister Wives focused heavily on the complicated relationships between Kody and his wives. But as the children grew older, many of them began developing their own opinions about what happened inside the family. And once those children became adults, they were no longer simply characters in their parents' story. They could speak for themselves. They could make their own decisions. And perhaps most importantly, they could decide how much of Kody they wanted in their lives. That changed the entire dynamic. Think about how different the Brown family looks today compared with the beginning of Sister Wives. Back then, many of the children were young. They depended on their parents. Family gatherings were normal. The adults controlled most of the decisions, but time changes everything. Those children grew up. They went to college. They started careers. They entered relationships. Some became parents themselves, and they developed their own understanding of what happened during their childhood. That means Kody can't simply explain the past to them anymore. They experienced it. They remember it. and they have their own perspectives. One of the most painful aspects of the Brown family's collapse is that the breakdown of the marriages didn't stay between the adults. Family conflict can spread. When parents stop speaking, children can feel caught in the middle. When siblings take different sides, relationships can become complicated. And when adult children feel that their parent wasn't there for important moments in their lives, resentment can build over time. That's why Kody's relationships with some of his children have become such a major part of the sister wives conversation. The issue isn't simply, which wife did Kody choose? The bigger question is, what did the family lose because of those choices? It's important to remember that Robyn's children are also part of the Brown family. They have grown up within the same larger family environment, but their experience has not necessarily been identical to that of Kody's other children. And this is where the family dynamic becomes extremely complicated. Kody's biological and adopted children have different relationships with him. Some have been closer, some have been more distant, and some have publicly expressed frustrations. That doesn't mean every child feels the same way. It would be unfair to put all of them into one category, but the differences are significant enough to keep fans asking questions. Could Kody eventually repair these relationships? Could the children forgive him? Would they even want to? And what role would Robyn play if those relationships were rebuilt? There is also another issue that continues to hang over the family. Kody has repeatedly faced criticism from viewers over the way he handled conflict with his adult children. Some fans believe he should take greater responsibility. Others argue that the children are adults now and should make their own choices. And then there are viewers who believe both sides have contributed to the breakdown. That's why this story isn't as simple as saying one person is entirely responsible. Families are complicated, long-term relationships are complicated, and the Brown family's history spans decades. There are old arguments, misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and decisions that can't simply be undone. But there is one thing that could potentially change the future: a genuine attempt to communicate. Imagine for a moment that Kody decided to stop defending himself. Instead of explaining why he was right, he simply listened. Instead of focusing on what his children did wrong, he asked them what they needed from him. That would be a completely different approach, and it could potentially open a door. But there is a major problem. Reconciliation doesn't happen because one person decides they're ready. Both sides have to be willing, and some of Kody's children may not be at that point. They may need time. They may want distance. They may not trust that things would actually change. And that's why a reunion wouldn't necessarily be a happy ending. It could be uncomfortable. It could be emotional. And it could force everyone involved to confront things they've spent years avoiding. This is where Robyn's role becomes especially interesting. If Kody begins rebuilding relationships with his children, Robyn will inevitably become part of that process. She doesn't have to control it. She doesn't have to be responsible for fixing it. But because she is Kody's only remaining wife, her life is connected to whatever happens next. And there is another possibility. What if Kody's children eventually decide they want a relationship with their father, but not necessarily with Robyn? That could create a very uncomfortable situation, because rebuilding a parent-child relationship doesn't automatically rebuild every other family relationship. There could be boundaries. There could be separate conversations. There could be complicated emotions. And everyone would have to respect those boundaries. Meanwhile, Christine, Janelle, and Meri are continuing to live their own lives. That's perhaps the most fascinating part of the entire transformation. They aren't sitting around waiting for Kody to change. They're creating new chapters. Christine has built a new marriage. Janelle has embraced greater independence. Meri has developed her own life outside of Kody. And the more independent these women become, the harder it is to imagine the Brown family returning to the old structure. Even if everyone suddenly became friendly again, it wouldn't be the same family. Too much has changed, too much time has passed, and too many people have discovered what life looks like outside the old system. That's the uncomfortable truth. The original dream of one large plural family living and functioning together has effectively changed. The family can still exist. The relationships can still exist. The children can still reconnect with their father. Former wives can still communicate. But the original structure is gone. And maybe that's what Robyn has to face most of all. The future isn't going to look like the past. There is no going back to the early seasons. There is no recreating the old family gatherings exactly as they were. There is no pretending that nothing happened. Everyone has changed. And Kody has changed too. Whether viewers like those changes is another question. There is still a possibility that the Brown family could surprise everyone. not by becoming one big happy plural family again. That chapter may be finished, but by finding a new kind of relationship, one where former wives can coexist without being married to the same man, one where adult children can establish boundaries with their father, one where Cody doesn't have to control every relationship, and one where Robyn doesn't have to carry the responsibility of being the center of Cody's world. That could actually be healthier than trying to recreate something that no longer works. But getting there won't be easy, because before the family can move forward, someone has to be willing to acknowledge the past. And that's where Cody faces his biggest challenge yet. Can he let go of the need to be right long enough to repair the relationships that matter most? Because if he can't, the Brown family may continue drifting further apart. But if he can, the next chapter could look completely different. And there is one relationship in particular that could become the ultimate test of whether Cody is truly ready to change: his relationship with Robyn herself. And now we arrive at the part of the story that may be the most uncomfortable for Cody and Robyn, because after everything that happened, they are no longer simply trying to preserve a plural family. They are trying to figure out what their marriage looks like without the family structure that once surrounded it. For years, Cody's attention was divided between multiple households. There were different wives, different children, different homes, different expectations. There was always another relationship demanding his attention, but that world is gone. Today, Cody and Robyn are facing a much simpler, but potentially much harder reality. It's just them. And when all the other relationships disappear, a couple is forced to confront their own relationship in a completely different way. One thing that makes Robyn's situation particularly complicated is that the past hasn't disappeared simply because the marriages ended. Christine is still part of the family's history. Janelle is still part of the family's history. Meri is still part of the family's history. And the children who grew up in that family haven't forgotten what happened either. Robyn may have moved forward with Cody, but the consequences of the family's collapse still surround them. That's why her new reality isn't necessarily about losing another sister wife. It's about realizing that the family she once imagined would surround her may never return, and that can be difficult to accept. Cody's priorities also appear to have changed dramatically over the years. Early in Sister Wives, he was obsessed with maintaining the plural family structure. He wanted everyone together. He wanted the wives to accept one another. He wanted the children to remain connected. But after years of conflict, those goals became increasingly difficult to achieve. Eventually, Cody seemed much more focused on the relationships that remained. And now, with Robyn as his only wife, the pressure on their marriage is enormous. There isn't another household to escape to. There isn't another marriage competing for his attention. There isn't another relationship that can absorb some of the emotional tension. Everything comes back to Cody and Robyn. This is one of the biggest questions fans continue to ask. Did Robyn really want to become the only wife? Probably not in the way the family ultimately ended up. Robyn repeatedly talked about wanting sister wives and a plural family, but reality turned out very differently. Christine left. Janelle left. Meri left. And suddenly, the plural marriage became a monogamous relationship. That's a massive transformation, and it creates an ironic situation. The family structure that was supposed to bring everyone together eventually became the reason so many people went their separate ways. Again, that doesn't mean Robyn personally caused the breakdown. There were years of disagreements, personal choices, changing relationships, and conflicts involving many people. But Robyn is now living with the outcome. And then there is the issue that could become the biggest challenge of all: Cody's children. If Cody genuinely wants to repair those relationships, he's going to have to do something that may be incredibly difficult for him. Listen, not defend, not argue, not explain. Listen, some of his children may have grievances that go back years. Some may not want immediate reconciliation. Some may want boundaries. And others may be more willing to reconnect. Every relationship will be different. That means there isn't going to be one magical family reunion where everything suddenly becomes perfect. Real reconciliation doesn't work that way. It takes time. It requires accountability, and most importantly, it requires both sides to feel safe enough to communicate. Robyn could potentially play an important role in this new chapter, but the healthiest thing she could do may actually be to step back. If Cody wants to repair relationships with his children, those relationships need room to develop independently. Robyn doesn't need to speak for him. She doesn't need to explain his intentions, and she doesn't need to convince anyone that Cody is a good father. Cody has to demonstrate that himself. That's a completely different situation from the early years of the show. Back then, the family often tried to solve problems collectively. Now, some relationships may need to be repaired one-on-one. And that could change everything. Christine, Janelle, and Meri have each demonstrated something important. Life after Cody is possible. They haven't simply disappeared. They've continued building careers, relationships, friendships, businesses, and personal identities. Their lives didn't end when their marriages ended. In many ways, their individual journeys became some of the most compelling stories of the later Sister Wives era. And that's why Kody and Robyn's future is so interesting. The former wives are moving forward. The children are becoming adults. The old family structure is disappearing. So what exactly are Kody and Robyn building now? That's the question. Maybe the Brown family isn't really ending. Maybe it's evolving. Instead of one enormous family unit, there may eventually be several smaller relationships connected by history. Christine has her life. Janelle has hers. Meri has hers. The adult children have their own lives. And Kody and Robyn have theirs. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to hate one another forever. It simply means the family has changed. And sometimes accepting that change is healthier than desperately trying to recreate the past. The biggest question going forward won't simply be, are Kody and Robyn still together? Fans will want to know something much deeper. Can Kody finally rebuild the relationships he lost? Because if he can, the Brown family story could take an entirely different direction. And if he can't, the emotional distance between Kody and his children could become permanent. Meanwhile, Robyn will have to navigate her own role in that future. She may have to accept that Kody's relationships with his adult children exist independently of her, and Kody may have to accept that his former wives can move on without him. That's a very different reality from the one viewers saw when Sister Wives first began. The family is no longer centered around one man and four wives. It's now a collection of individuals trying to find their own way. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of this entire story. The Brown family didn't necessarily disappear. It changed. The question now is whether everyone can find a way to live with that change. And if the next chapter brings more revelations about Kody's relationships with his children, Robyn's place in the family, and the lives of the former wives, the story could become even more dramatic. Because one thing is certain, the Brown family's old life is over. What comes next may be the most revealing chapter yet.